Alright guys, so it is Monday morning. We're just on the way to the studio now, and today we're going to be finishing up a piece for my client. Well, the tattoo is the that Indian god, the elephant. So yeah, that's the image that we're going to be completing. I feel like it's pretty healed, maybe nearly a year since we started this piece. So it'll be good to get that finished for the bro. Obviously, one thing that kind of sucks about this scenario is half the tattoo is going to appear very healed and the other half is going to appear very fresh. I like the look of both of them, but not necessarily together. But sweet, I'll see you at the studio. What's up, brother? Yeah, all good. It's that piece looking, bro. Yeah, cool. It looks super nice. Hey, gangster. Sweet, bro. And I'll just have you standing for a sec. Have a look at that healed piece. Maybe just stand over here. It just looks hectic when it's that tight detail. It's like we can't really rush that style. It's just like I'll probably just tattoo all of like the right side, like stencil that all on first. Alright guys, so as you can see, there's still some small areas in this tattoo to be completed, and I'm making the choice to stencil each area on its own. And my reason for that is if I stencil everything, I'm just going to be risking losing that stencil as I'm working. So just to eliminate that risk for myself, it makes it really simple when you are continuing on a tattoo like this to do it that way. And as you can see now, all of my videos from this point on are going to be filmed with 2 camera angles, so it should make things a lot more interesting for you guys. Okay, now we're getting into the tattoo. The machine that I'm using for this tattoo is the Fold Pro, and the inks I'm using is the Xtreme whitewash set. I'm also using an opaque white, which you can see there, and a dynamic triple black for my black. And the needles that I'm using are from Metrix. So there's a few round mags there, a 13 and a 23. I think there's 2 round liners, a 7 extra tight and a 5. And then a 7 round shader. Now usually I don't use a 5 round liner, but you'll see in this tattoo there's some jewelry and stuff like that I want to make really sharp. So a 5 round liner is great for that. And you can see that's the needle that we're using here. And I'll just get this down to real time again. You can see that my hand speed and the technique that I'm using is I'm just making everything really deliberate. My hand speed is really slow, and there's enough depth there to just really cleanly make all of these lines and sharp little shapes in one pass. I really want it to be a really crisp edge. So I'm not looking for anything too blurry, just really sharp and deliberate passes. So yeah, that's done just by slowing my hand speed down a little bit and just putting a little bit more weight behind the needle. Now let me start this video off by giving you guys one of the biggest pro tips. Now we've all come into tattoos like this where you get to some really tight detail. Quite often it is in areas where there's jewelry and stuff like that. Now sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming to look at. Especially perhaps size-wise, your tattoo might be a little bit smaller than the reference you're looking at. So I really encourage people and myself the way that I do this. I used to try and recreate my reference dot for dot with all of that detail, but quite often that would lead to issues like oversaturating and just closing in some of that negative space, which is so important, especially in sharp aspects like the jewelry. So I do find it's a lot better if I just take a moment to understand and look at my reference and then apply that information into the shape, like the interior of the jewelry, that kind of form that we've made. So when I'm looking at my reference, I'm looking for that level of sharpness and the amount of negative space that's there. And then once I have that information, I can just look at my tattoo and just kind of insert that texture of the jewelry, rather than trying to dot for dot do all of the stuff. It's going to take longer, and it can lead to things like, oversaturating. If you just make the best judgment call while you're really just looking at the tattoo, as opposed to having 90% of your focus in your reference, and if you're just recreating that, and then you stare at your tattoo and you're like, oh, it's a little bit too late now, I've closed in all that negative space, or it's just a little bit too cluttered. Like, my theory really is almost to grab a texture and drag and drop it into that kind of masked off area. And personally, I think that that's a really artistic choice. It's less the reference and it's more style. It's a little bit more your twist and your understanding of how you visualize this texture and all the levels of contrast and values that you want to have in there. So it really is these personal touches and decisions where you step away from your reference a fraction. It's still realistic and it's still what it's meant to be, but maybe you're making a decision to enhance what you're doing. So you can see so far in the tattoo, we've mapped in a lot of this early work, a lot of the jewelry and the hands. We're starting on some of the mag work just with our darker values. So getting a lot of our black values in. And I love doing things with mags, but you can see here, this area is just too small to realistically get a mag in there. It could do more harm than good trying to use a mag to complete these hands. Just with the size that they are, it's probably a lot more efficient, especially for the healing side of things, if I just get in there with a liner and really efficiently put that in. And it's definitely going to give me a nice level of sharpness. These objects are pretty far forward, so I've got no issue them being quite sharp in focus. And then it also allows me to wash over some of these really nice values and saturate really easily on this tattoo. Once things are lined in quite dominant like that, you can really be a little bit looser and lazier with your shading, so it kind of speeds up the whole process sometimes. It's like if you go from tattooing something that's really realistic, like a photograph, to something in comparison, like some digital art or some work like that. I always find it's so fast tattooing kind of digital art references where values are so much more simplified and forms are just so much simpler in general. There's a lot less of that kind of softer, noisier detail. So you can see in the tattoo here, I'm really just making sure that this black value is super solid, packing that in nicely with my 13 round mag, and just making light passes on that, making sure that that's hard up to the edge, and just really focusing on the black being solid because that is the anchor to all my other values. If that fundamental's off, then all my values are kind of placed all over the place rather than that kind of smooth gradient from dark to light that I'll be trying to achieve. Now here's an area that I was talking about earlier. Now that things are lined out, it's really easy to saturate and shade in these forms. On each of these fingers, there's a hard edge for me to work a gradient off. So I can work off that black thin outline that we've made and just really begin saturating. And I'm never going to lose that form with these light values. So I guess whenever you're working with those outlines, you're always going to have a really strong looking image. There's going to be no confusion on what that form is. And you can see I didn't make any actions that were kind of overboard while lining. I still left the top of the finger where you can see it's kind of having the palm as the background there. Really light or almost no outline there because there is a softer value where that kind of joins onto the palm. So I still want that finger to have a highlight at the top there. So I only outlined in black where it was a shadow. I didn't want to make any unrealistic decisions, although it will give me more structure to my form. I still want this image to be really nice and realistic. That's always what I'm going for with my tattoos. And these lighter values that I'm creating here are really great for working next to and heavily saturating around blacks. It creates such a nice deep looking shadow. And that value is just made up as your reflective light sitting in that shadow. So just below your core shadow, you've got that really nice full, and it's still almost like a glowing kind of light value sitting in there as that reflected light. it's not just a grainy black value that's kind of washed down into that area. It's something that's really nice and still has a lot of life in that as a value. And it's just such a great saturating tone in general, my lightest value that I've kind of made up. It would be quite hard to overuse in a way. There's a lot of artists that do heavily saturate with a lot of these really light values, and their work still looks great. So yeah, it's such a nice value to just really be able to saturate over your pieces. And I think a lot of artists are working a little bit like that these days. They're almost creating a value that they're just washing over their whole tattoo at the end of it. I've seen a few artists doing. I'm not really into maybe an action that's so lazy in my tattooing. Like, oh, I don't know, maybe lazy is offensive to those other artists. I don't know. They're good artists, but could you not just use that kind of value and put that life with your opaque into your tattoo throughout it, just how you do with all your other values? Um, yeah, I'm really, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm not sure if that's a lazy thing or not. Now, there is also an oil painting technique called glazing, where you create a value, or yeah, you create that pigment that you like, and you just oil it down quite a bit, or you apply it onto dry paint and really work that across your work. So I guess it's more of a glazing technique, and that's something that's quite interesting to think about. A lot more of artistic techniques coming into tattooing. And I think it's things like that that will be the next steps in tattooing. Obviously, technology can only kind of go so far with achieving, yeah, something that looks amazing. Perhaps the next real breakthroughs in tattooing will be from different techniques or people mixing some crazy stuff with their inks. I'm not too sure. And even myself, so I think at 10 years of tattooing, and I'm now using an opaque that I mix into my values as I'm tattooing. So I've just made a decision, like artistically, and how I like values to look, and the amount of kind of life and everything, yeah, the way that I want this value to appear. I've kind of used the opaque to really fill a little bit of what was missing in black and grey for me. So I'm just, yeah, mixing a little hit of that. I won't get too into that now. I do actually have a video on how I kind of mix and work with this opaque tone. I think that video is called the best ink for tattooing realism or something along those lines. But yeah, you'll be able to see that on my channel. You can even see now with that value that I'm using now. This is a mid-tone, but there's a small hit of opaque in there. And you can see it isn't appearing black like normal black and grey would there when it's sitting on top of the skin. It's like there's just a bit more life in it. Like the pigment itself is a little bit thicker. It's like a kind of like a creamier value than something that's sitting so black and grey. It's almost like comparing like oil painting or airbrushing these nice grayer values as opposed to charcoal, which is always just your level of black and how you're kind of working or packing in that pigment, that burnt byproduct. You know, this is something that's a little bit different, having some kind of white instilled in your ink. And the opaque value that I work with is a grey, because I think that a grey, as far as your level of values, is going to translate so much better to these darker values. If I try mixing a white with a black or a really dark grey, value-wise, they're just completely contrasting from one and another. So working with a grey, I think maybe having that sitting so much lower as a value and closer in relationship of like contrast and all that to a darker value, I think it's going to mix so much better. But now back to our tattoo. So you can see I've made those same kind of progressive steps that we made in that lower hand. I'm working with my finest liner, creating these nice, really sharp and crispy forms. And then later on, we can start that saturating. So it's really good having that process that you just keep applying. You keep stamping to every area throughout this tattoo that we need to. We're going to start off with that same process, and it's going to create a really good workflow for this tattoo. I'm not the fastest tattooist, and I'm really into my detail, so I need things like this to help save me time. I can never rush the tattoo, but I can have more efficient processes. Like, it's all very good and well to say, oh, I'm an artist, I don't rush my work, and it's going to take as long as it does. But I think it's really good and a really healthy thing for your tattoo career and a respect for your clients to start thinking about some of these processes where you can save time, such as even the stencil. Using this inkjet stencil instead of hand stenciling is getting me tattooing 40 minutes faster at least every day. So that's 40 minutes more tattoo time that my client gets. So it's little things like that. And now you can see we're on to using our mag. So just working around all these nice forms that we've created with our liner, and just applying now some more of our softer and just more saturating values. Things that are creating some of these small forms inside of our lines. We're really starting to render all of these forms down and find that level of saturation that we want. Sorry guys, there's a little bit of that footage that's a bit blurry, but yeah, you can see we're just taking our time with the mag to just really shade in and saturate these fingers, and using the mag on its edge there so I can just really cleanly keep these highlights where I want them, like on the fingernail there. Let's jump back into some real-time tattooing. Now this is mostly because I love this value, so this is my lightest value with that hit of opaque. I really can't get enough of this value. Yeah, there's just so much life sitting in it that it's so great for saturating, and it doesn't take away from your portrait where it saturates. A lot of the time it's your negative space that's the only life in your tattoo, but no, I think that this really gives such a nice soft touch, and it saturates but it keeps life and a little bit of lightness in your tattoo. Alright guys, so that is that section of the tattoo complete. So now we're on to the other side where there's some more hands. So just removing that stencil now. And this part of the video, I might just skim through a little bit more. I don't want to repeat that same aspect that we've already seen and gone over. So yeah, I'll see if there's any more tips that I think are useful for you guys to share. But otherwise I'll make this side a little bit faster to save some time and get onto something that's fresh in the video. So yeah, here we're just doing the exact same process. We're just nicely putting a bit of a hard edge on some of these shadows and lining where we can. Yeah, it's a great way to save a little bit of time and make some really confident decisions that are going to allow for some faster and lazier shading, really. We're putting in a little bit more work here with the liner, and then allowing our mags to kind of come through and saturate up to these hard edges that we've put on our form. And that is this step here. So with that really nice value that we talked about earlier, this is a touch darker, but it is still great for saturating. And here I am like kind of saturating pretty lazy because it is the majority value in this area. And then I can go through with maybe a smaller mag, or at least just a darker value, and then put in some more of these like core shadows and some of that deeper value and shadow that we want to see in this form. But it is really nice. It's not a way that I usually work, and that decision is made because the hands are quite small. But yeah, lining things really allows for such easy and fast mag work. I know this is sped up, but man, that was a breeze to watch. I'm sure it took me ages to tattoo. Kind of false advertising there on how easy that was. I think that was 1 minute and we've completed the hand. Yeah, so if you guys want to tattoo like that, then just donate to the channel, and before you know it, you guys will be tattooing exactly like this, maybe even faster. Nah, I'm joking, don't do that. So now we're just on to the last remaining hand, but let's skip through a little bit of that. We've already tattooed 3 of them on video, so that's plenty for you guys. Or if you guys do want to see heaps of hands getting tattooed, then I'd recommend just rewinding and rewatching the video a whole bunch of times. Anyway, back to the video. So now we are starting the headdress of this Ganesh piece. And I'm always so glad when I bloodlined in things from the previous session. It makes things so easy, not having to place a stencil or worry about anything washing off. Things just seem so much more locked in and such a fast way to tattoo, just having a few lines permanently there. Yeah, it's quite interesting how much faster I tend to work. And with this part of the headdress, I'm really just wanting to overuse my liners and really put in so much work with those that I can just make a few small little hits saturating with a mag, and this area is going to look so perfectly done and complete. And you can see with this real-time footage just the amount of precision that I'm really wanting to put into this area, making all of these lines really nice and crisp with a little bit of a slower hand speed. Now as we come into some of these other lines with a little bit more form that they're giving to the headdress and some of these kind of jewels and shapes, perhaps a little bit faster and a scratchier movement with a little bit of variation on how solid I want this line to be. And so much of tattooing aspects like this is really just like manipulating your negative space and your lighter values. So with your dark tones in your liners, you just want to kind of flick things the right way, put curves on things. You can see this clip is real time, and I'm kind of just creating a technique with my liner. And the same here. So this is real time, and I'm just kind of skimming in with my liner to create that correct form. Like I talked about at the start of this video, just really almost kind of dragging and dropping in what I'm seeing from my reference. Not thinking too much about the precision of my reference, dot for dot recreating that, but the same idea. I'm allowing a little bit to be left for the viewer to kind of pick up and finish some of that form, rather than focusing on being so perfect to my reference. And that accuracy is still the same there if you see the reference. There's just a little bit more of artistic flair, I think, there. So let's just speed up through a little bit of this. Now that we're finishing our lining in this area, our next step, and like we talked about earlier, is our saturating passes with our mags. Now, since we put in so much work with our liner, there's not a lot left. All we need our mag work to do is to create that level of saturation in our shadows and give us that nice render on this form. So really rounding it off, giving that domed look for this headdress. And I really like the work that we did with our liner here. It's a little bit scratchy and kind of, it just looks realistic. It's like imperfect, you know? And most importantly, the look that I've applied is relevant and true to this kind of statue godlike feel. It's not something that's so crisp and perfect like what might appear in a different era or maybe some more modern jewelry. I think things would look a lot more precise and cleaner. Alright guys, so now we are on to our last stage and step of this tattoo. So we have a little bit of a background here that is similar to some of the jewelry, especially in shape. We have a nice like kind of round form sitting behind our portrait, which gives a lot to this tattoo. Now this tattoo's obviously taken a while for my client, and we were kind of both looking at each other with the same idea of how much do we put into this background. You can see there's a lot of detail all the way out where the background washes back, and we both kind of had the same decision of stopping that detail a little bit sooner. Now this being a background, I want it to give to the portrait, not really take away with any busyness. So I've left a little bit of that, and we're just doing a few rings of the background. Missing out on some of those rings is going to save us a lot of time, and I think actually make our portrait and all that other work that we've done look a lot more powerful and keeping the viewer looking in that area. Things like this sometimes can look nice in the background, but here I'm still going to wash it back with some saturating passes to keep it stepped away from my portrait. I want to make it less important and stand out less than the portrait. So a heavy level of saturation over this area is a great way to achieve that. I want little to no negative space left in this area, so it's really simple for the viewer to see where that headdress starts and stops. There is a lot more negative space in my reference, but I think it would lead to a little bit of confusion on what's going on. the shape is exactly the same as that headdress with that kind of circular shape, and the texture is exactly the same. So yeah, a great way to step away from that is by making my level of values and my level of saturation really different, a lot darker and washed a lot further back into the background. And that's exactly what we're doing here. So with our 23 mag, we're just passing over with a nice like hearty pigment. There's plenty of value and fullness sitting in this. So it's kind of like a light medium value, and just passing over it really lazy. It doesn't need to be anything special. Just saturate and push this background back. And what a nice way to finish up the day for my client, just packing in the elbow ditch like that, really saturating that there. That must feel great. But now we're on to have a look at our finished result. Yeah, bro. Yeah, it came out perfect. And then even like, it's gonna be a bit easier whatever we do from now on. Maybe even do like some random like symbol. I was thinking, do it like pretty negative so it stands out almost as much as these letters.
I was keen to get something like that.
Yeah.
Last name, like probably up the back.
Oh yeah. All of that will work in pretty well, I reckon. Yeah, do something similar. Like now that we've done the hard out detail, you wanna like do some easier like visually stuff down the bottom. So like yeah, things like this are perfect. Yeah, so that'll work good. Like do that, taking up a bit of the space, and then maybe even some kind of effect. Do some kind of like smoky, but make it look a bit more like mythical kind of smoke, like a bit more spotty. So like yeah, with that lettering done and a bit of a background, like that'll be a lot. Pretty much done, you know. When did we do that?
Which one? This was my last one. I mean.
Oh yeah.
That was in like early this year?
Yeah. I might even pop a video just of the heel stuff quick. Yeah. Alright guys, so here's a quick look at my client's sleeve. All the work on here ranges from about 8 years ago. I reckon that fish at the bottom would be like, yeah, 8 or 7 years. And then the inner arm there was maybe in the last year. And here's some more older stuff sitting on the outside. And also this lower piece here must be a couple years old as well. So yeah, even though there's so many years in between all the pieces, everything's still looking great. The only thing maybe it could do with one little like half day to merge everything together. The pieces themselves are fine. Yeah, I reckon just a day with a black value and a 23 mag and wash everything together. Sweet my brother.
I'll see you next time, man.
Yeah, that's us, bro. Yeah, we'll definitely, just let me know, bro, when works with you, and then we'll smash it.
Yeah, sweet. Definitely.
That's us, my brother. Good to see you, bro. Yeah. Now we just got to chuck some gloves on, get everything cleaned up, and then that is us. Alright guys, that is us done. So our tattoo's finished, and I really enjoyed working how we did today. Having half of the tattoo already done, a lot of all that really hard stuff, so it made it quite easy for me to have an enjoyable session, just completing some of the finer details and the work that was left to be done really. But thank you guys for making it to the end of the video. I really appreciate your guys' ongoing support. Now make sure that you like the video, that you're subscribed to the channel, and that you get involved in the comments down below. I'll see you guys in the next video.